Night fell over Jerusalem, heavy and oppressive like an ancient curse. The desert wind howled through the ancient stone alleys, carrying the breath of 1,000 years of history. But tonight, it bore something else, an unease, a distant roar emanating from the crumbling pages of time. It was no mere wind. It was the echo of prophecy, a judgment written since the dawn of creation. In the silent rooms of the Research Institute, the pale yellow light spilled onto brittle old scrolls. Ancient maps, covered with symbols and names, lay spread across tables. There were no grizzled archaeologists with white hair or young scholars diligently at work. Only an invisible fear permeated every word, every drawing. For tonight, what they had discovered was not the trace of a lost civilization, but living proof of a looming catastrophe. It all began with a sign, not a sign in the sky, but on the earth itself, where ancient stone slabs suddenly revealed their secrets. These were not ordinary stones. They were tombstones of the past, etched by an unseen hand, pointing a path leading northward, and upon it a chilling symbol, a ram's horn. This was no symbol of peace. It was a call to war. The inscriptions beneath the ram's horn, though faded with time, were still clear enough to read. Meshech and Tubal. Names alien to most of the world, but alarm bells to those who had spent their lives poring over ancient texts. For in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, it is written, "Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal." That prophecy had haunted theologians and scholars for millennia. It spoke of a power from the uttermost parts of the north that would rise in the latter days to attack Israel. Now, these stone slabs, undeniable physical evidence, seemed to confirm a forgotten warning. There were no screams of panic, no immediate sensational headlines. Only a terrifying silence descended. This information was sealed off, kept strictly confidential among those in positions of responsibility, for the truth was too horrific to be widely publicized. An alliance was forming, an alliance prophesied thousands of years ago. In a distant land across mountains and deserts, the wind whistling through the archways of Tehran also carried a different tune, a tune of anticipation, of unshakable faith. In the sealed chambers of the Islamic Revolutionary Council, the atmosphere was not one of fear, but of fervent exhilaration. For them, too, prophecies were unfolding, but in an entirely different light. In ancient manuscripts of the Quran and in the doctrines of Islamic eschatology, there was mention of the return of the Imam Mahdi and a final confrontation with the enemies of Islam. And for them, the rise of a power from the north, the gathering of nations, was precisely the sign that the time was ripe. They did not search for ancient stone tablets. They searched for signs on the modern world map. Persia, modern-day Iran; Turkey, Gomer and Togarmah; Russia, Rosh; Sudan, Kush; Libya, Put. These names were no longer distant nations. They were shifting pieces, one by one, forming a complete picture of the prophecy, a picture of an unstoppable alliance. A mysterious, almost cruel smile touched the lips of their leaders. To them, the Westerners panicking over ancient rocks were blind. They failed to see the larger picture, to comprehend the will of the Almighty. And as the church bells echoed across Jerusalem in the morning, carrying a fragile sliver of hope, somewhere to the north, the clang of weaponry, the rumble of countless soldiers shook the very ground. The roar of the past was no longer an echo. It was transforming into reality, little by little, right before the eyes of a world still slumbering in indifference. Destiny was drawing near, bringing with it a battle foretold for millennia. A battle that would decide not just the fate of one people, but of all humanity.
Dawn broke over the northern mountains, but the sunlight carried no warmth. Instead, a colossal shadow, a military cloud, was forming on the horizon. It was no ordinary storm cloud, but the convergence of armies, masses of equipment, and souls burning with unshakable conviction. The prophecy of Ezekiel was no longer a whispered word in ancient libraries. It had transformed into a grand convocation, a gathering of nations. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes that are gathered to you, and be their commander. Ezekiel 38:7. This command was not just for Gog, the enigmatic figure from the land of Magog, but for all the nations predestined to join his alliance. And they came. From the vast plains of the north, the armies of Russia, began to move, bringing with them their immense military might. Heavy tanks rumbled, fighter jets tore through the sky, and soldiers with grim faces turned southward. For them, this was more than just a military operation. It was a display of power, an assertion of their position on the international stage driven by strategic interests, and perhaps even a belief in a new order under the light of prophecy. From the east, through majestic mountain ranges, the armies of Persia, Iran, pounded westward. No longer were there secret maneuvers or empty threats. Millions had been mobilized, with fervent religious zeal burning in their hearts. Banners bearing sacred symbols waved in the wind, and hymns echoed through the valleys. For them, this was the final pilgrimage, a battle to pave the way for the return of Imam Mahdi, to eliminate enemies, and to establish a righteous empire. They were not alone. From the scorching lands of Kush, Ethiopia and Sudan, and Put, Libya, powerful, battle-hardened desert warriors also joined the fray. They brought with them an uncompromising fighting spirit, fueled by ancient grievances and the promise of a grand victory. Caravans of camels, off-road vehicles laden with weaponry, traversed vast deserts heading toward the rendezvous point. And from the west, Gomer and Togarmah, names evoking modern-day Turkey and its surrounding regions, also answered the call. Though their histories had seen moments of conflict, they now set aside their differences to join an alliance with a common goal. Elite divisions of soldiers, modern war machines, along with nomadic forces from distant regions, formed a diverse army bound by a single will.
You will come up like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your hordes, and many peoples with you. This sight, observed by satellites and intelligence reports, was an undeniable reality, a colossal cloud comprising millions of warriors, tanks, planes, and weapons, was slowly swallowing the map of the Middle East, heading straight for Israel. The Western world watched this spectacle with shock and disbelief. Diplomats raced against time, issuing calls for restraint, sanctions, and threats. But their voices seemed too faint against the drums of war reverberating from the north. They tried to find political, economic, or geostrategic explanations, but they missed a crucial element: religious conviction, a power capable of swaying all humanity. Israel, the small and resilient nation, stood before the greatest test in its history. Its people had returned from exile, rebuilt their land on ancestral soil, exactly as prophesied. They had planted vineyards, built homes, and hoped for a peaceful future. But now, other prophecies, those of war and destruction, were knocking at their door. The prophecy of Daniel also alluded to the complexity of relations between nations, speaking of the king of the north and the king of the south, on Daniel 11, and their continuous conflicts. It showed that these events were not random, but links in a larger chain of events leading to a predetermined conclusion. As night fell, it was no longer just the sound of the wind. It was the roar of tens of thousands of warriors, the rumble of thousands of war machines, and the echo of ancient prophecies. The grand convocation was complete. The storm had formed, and Israel, alone, stood steadfast on the path of destiny, awaiting an inevitable confrontation.
The third dawn of the siege broke, painting the sky over Jerusalem in a hue of blood. No longer was it a distant call from the north. Now, the roar of Gog's army resonated directly at the city gates. The colossal military cloud had not only covered the land, but also obscured the sky, turning day into night. Ezekiel's prophecy was no longer a warning. It had become a terrifying reality. You will come up against my people Israel, like a cloud to cover the land. It will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me, when I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before their eyes. Ezekiel 38:8-16. This was Israel, a people who had returned from exile, rebuilt their land on ancestral soil, and were living in a false sense of security. They had believed in peace, in their ability to defend themselves, but they had forgotten one crucial thing: where true power lay. Gog's army, with the overwhelming might of Persia, Russia, Turkey, Sudan, Libya, poured into Israel like a flood. They carried no strange energy cannons or extraterrestrial weapons like fictional tales. Instead, they brought heavy war machines, artillery that crushed everything in its path, and elite infantry units burning with fanatical zeal. Every step they took was an assertion of power, a declaration of inevitable destruction. The desperate cries of the Israeli people echoed everywhere. Coastal cities were besieged, mountain villages burned, and peaceful settlements turned into rubble. They fought with all their might, with the courage of a people accustomed to war, but it seemed utterly hopeless. The vast disparity in numbers and weaponry pushed them to the brink of annihilation. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all their young lions will say to you, "Have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder?" Ezekiel 38:13. The feeble protests from neutral nations, the criticisms from major trading powers, all were swallowed by the roar of the conflict. No one dared to truly confront Gog and his colossal alliance. The world turned its back, terrified by this seemingly unstoppable force. In Tehran, the Iranian leaders, who considered themselves instruments of prophecy, celebrated daily victories. They believed this was a sign of the Imam Mahdi's imminent return, that they were paving the way for a new era of Islamic dominance. That belief transformed them into ruthless zealots, blind to all the suffering they caused. The prophecy of Daniel also hinted at the hardships God's people would face in the end times. There shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. Daniel 12:1. This was that time, a period when Israel faced annihilation, a period when their faith was tested to its limits. As Gog's army advanced into Jerusalem, the holy city, home to the temple and the most ancient memories, despair enveloped it. Prayers echoed from synagogues and churches, but they seemed unable to penetrate the dust clouds and the din of war. Israel stood on the precipice. The sword of destiny hung precariously over their heads. But in that moment of utter despair, when all human hope seemed extinguished, a strange shift began to occur. Not a loud explosion or a military counterattack. It was a sensation, an inexplicable tremor originating deep within the earth, spreading across the mountains of Israel. The sky suddenly turned pitch black, not from smoke, but from another presence. Presence that no military force on earth could withstand. This was when Ezekiel's prophecy turned a new page, a page humanity could never have anticipated. On that day, when God comes against the land of Israel, my wrath will be aroused. Ezekiel 38:18. The sword of destiny did not just hang over Israel, it now pointed at the one who wielded it.
The world held its breath, watching Israel, awaiting the death knell for a small nation. But then, the unimaginable happened. The prophecy of Ezekiel, recorded millennia ago, suddenly erupted into reality in the most terrifying and majestic way. As Gog's army, with its overwhelming might, prepared to deliver the decisive blow to Jerusalem, the sky above the mountains of Israel suddenly tore open, not with dark clouds of dust or storm. It was another presence, an inexplicable energy source, making the air thick and the ground shake violently. Quote, "I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, declares the Lord God. Every man's sword will be against his brother." End quote. Ezekiel 38:21. An incomprehensible chaos erupted within Gog's ranks. Seasoned warriors, soldiers trained to fight as a single machine, suddenly turned against one another. Horrified screams echoed as allies butchered allies, brother slew brother. Swords, guns, tanks all became instruments of a self-destructive frenzy. There was no order, no reason, only a supernatural impetus driving them to tear each other apart. And that was just the beginning. Quote, "I will punish him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him and on his troops, and on the many nations with him." End quote. Ezekiel 38:22. The sky unleashed a horrifying deluge, not water, but colossal stones, hailstones as large as fists, falling with the force of meteorites, crushing everything. Then fire. Bolts of fire descended from the heavens, not from bombs, but mysterious flames igniting everything they touched. Brimstone, a smoldering, toxic substance, spread everywhere, turning the air into a colossal inferno. Even the thickest armored tanks melted like wax into the horrific heat. Planes fell like shot birds, incinerating into piles of ash. Millions of soldiers, the mightiest warriors, disintegrated in this irresistible wrath. Their agonizing screams were swallowed by the booming thunder and the crackling of flames. This was not a battle between men. This was judgment.
From distant command centers in Tehran, the Iranian leaders watched this spectacle through flickering reports, their faces pale with horror. Their fanatical faith dissolved into utter terror. Impossible. Allah would not do this. This is the enemy's dark magic, they screamed, but no one could explain it. Their grand plan, built on prophecies they believed would bring victory, had crumbled in an instant. Ezekiel 39 further describes the horrifying scene. "You will fall on the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and wild animals." The land was strewn with corpses, becoming a feast for carrion birds and wild beasts. The scene was utterly devastating, an undeniable testament to the power of the Almighty. Daniel's prophecy also foreshadowed a time of extreme tribulation, but also promised deliverance. "At that time your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered." Although Israel stood on the brink of annihilation, they were saved not by their own strength, but by the hand of God. As the wrath from heaven subsided, an eerie silence settled over the mountains of Israel. No more gunfire, no more screams. Only smoke rising from the rubble and the smell of destruction. The invasion had been halted. The enemy had been utterly destroyed. But this was not Israel's victory. This was God's judgment. The world witnessed it. Satellite images, though unable to capture the full horror, still showed the absolute annihilation of a colossal army. This could not be explained by science or military strategy. It transcended all human reason. It was a reminder that a higher power reigned, a power that could change the fate of nations in an instant. The prophecy had been fulfilled in a terrifying manner so that the world might know. "Thus I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord." As the first rays of dawn after the wrath illuminated the mountains of Israel, the air still hung heavy with the smell of smoke and brimstone, yet a strange sense of cleansing pervaded. The valleys,
which only hours before had been a hell of war, are now a colossal graveyard of destroyed war machines and millions of bodies. Gog's army, once the world's most powerful alliance, had been utterly annihilated, not by human hands, but by a direct intervention from heaven. For 7 months, the people of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land, Ezekiel 39:12. The 7 months speak to the scale of the destruction. This was no ordinary battle. It was a catastrophe, a predetermined purification. The scattered corpses across the land were a gruesome testament to the power of judgment. The people of Israel, though horrified by the sight, also understood that they had been miraculously saved. Globally, news of the event spread like lightning. World leaders, scientists, military experts, all were unable to offer a coherent explanation. All theories of seismic activity, climate events, or even advanced weaponry became meaningless in the face of the unusual scale and nature of the destruction. The death of millions, not by human bombs, but by internal chaos and fire from heaven, instilled deep fear and doubt in what they had once believed. In Tehran, an atmosphere of mourning descended. Cries of lamentation echoed from every corner. The public's trust in their religious leaders completely collapsed. The supreme leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Council, who had promised victory based on prophecies, now faced public humiliation and fury. They had led the nation into a terrible calamity, an outcome they themselves had never anticipated. Ezekiel's prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in the way they desired. Thus I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. This was not just a victory for Israel, it was a revelation to the entire world. The name of God had been glorified with immense majesty and splendor. This event irrevocably changed humanity's perception of a supernatural force, of an unseen hand intervening in the course of history.
For Israel, this event profoundly strengthened their religious faith. They had witnessed God's promise fulfilled in a magnificent way. A powerful spiritual revival swept across the nation. The previously marginalized voices of religious scholars and those who believed in the literal interpretation of prophecy were now elevated, their insights eagerly sought. It was a reaffirmation of the biblical covenant, a powerful testament that Israel was not alone, but protected by a higher power. The United States and its allies, while still grappling with the strategic implications, also began a deeper examination of their own understanding of faith and prophecy. Intelligence agencies, previously dismissive of religious motives in foreign policy, now established new departments dedicated to understanding eschatological beliefs and their influence on global actors. It was a humbling realization that their purely secular geopolitical models were incomplete, failing to account for the profound impact of spiritual convictions on the world stage. The world, irrevocably altered, stepped into an era defined by newfound uncertainty and a collective, unsettling awareness of forces beyond human control. The War of Gog and Magog was not an isolated event. It was a profound shift, a prelude to further unfolding prophecies. It forced humanity to grapple with its own vulnerability and to reconsider the possibility of a divine plan for human history. However, this was not the end of all prophecies. Ezekiel also speaks of Israel using the abandoned weapons of their enemies as fuel for 7 years, Ezekiel 39, 9-10, a sign of a long period of recovery and cleansing. Daniel also describes other events that will lead to the emergence of the Antichrist and the Great Tribulation before the eternal kingdom of God is established. As the dawn of this new era illuminated the earth, the world remained filled with unanswered questions. But one thing was clear. Ancient prophecies were not myths. They were part of a grand plan unfolding. And humanity now had been awakened to a new reality, a reality where its fate was shaped by what had been written long ago. The storm had passed, but the journey into the final days of human history had only just begun.